And yes, we are live. I'm here with my new friend Alex. Alex, how are you doing?
Hey, David, doing well. Glad to be here with you today.
Well, thanks for taking the time. I'm excited to meet you because you've helped me out on my podcast with your Podmatch app, and it's so cool meeting all these people around the world. But mainly, I have to admit, most of the people that I've met have been in the U.S. of A. And I think you're in the U.S. too, right?
I am correct. I'm in Jacksonville, Florida.
Oh, in Florida. Cool. Yeah. So I don't know that much about you. Your name's Sanfilippo, so I think you must be Sicilian or something like that.
Correct. Yeah, that's it.
But
Yep.
so no mafia jokes, okay? No mafia jokes.
Yeah.
I'll respect your
My family
heritage.
tells plenty of them, so it's all right.
But go back, maybe talk about your roots. I mean, I'm curious to know if you have Catholic roots or not. But just talk about the family, the family, and how you were raised with faith and philosophy. And because I don't know. I mean, I heard through the grapevine that you might be Christian, but I don't know what the story is. So just tell me, how you grew up, how you were raised, and all the twists and turns on the journey, how you figured out how to think for yourself and what you think's going on ultimately. Just tell us the whole story.
Yeah, sure. So, first off, coming from like a Catholic family, if you will, my whole family, when I was a little kid, they were all Roman Catholic, very traditional, and that's kind of what I grew up in. Even though I don't know how old I was. This is going back before I can really remember, but probably before the age of 10, let's put it that way. I started going to I don't even know what to call it. It was some sort of like hybrid Baptist church, if that's even a thing. And if that's total like sacrilege, forgive me, right? Like it was something between that. So it still was very traditional, just kind of outside of what we knew as like the Roman Catholic side of it. And that was kind of where I guess you could say I started having like a memory. Like I actually started remembering those things, being involved in Sunday school and just learning from that. So from a very young age, I can remember being in very traditional, um, I guess, church, for lack of a better term, right?
With
Not
the
knowing exactly what it's
Eucharist
called.
and confession and everything?
So that was all that was before. So this was like that was what made it different. That's why I'm not exactly sure what it was, but
Ah,
they didn't have any of that type of like there was nothing
okay.
involved for me aside from making sure I was at Sunday school every Sunday morning.
No
And
kneelers?
no, nothing like that.
Okay.
Nope.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I did that most of my childhood, if you will. And then for me, I ended up like leaving at a young age, even though like I was still living with my parents because I had some friends that were going to like youth groups. And I was like, youth group sounds fun. And that church was really small, didn't have any of that. So I ended up going somewhere else. My parents were like, I guess it's fine. He's still going to church or whatever. And during this time, my family, actually, my immediate family, started going away from church completely, which was kind of a sad thing because I think it actually was a very good baseline foundation for them at the very least, right? Let's forget the whole relationship with God. Just the structure of it, I think, was very healthy, keeping them in a good environment. But for me, so I found my family not going to church, me going to a random youth group, and I would call that probably non-denominational, is what I would consider that to be. And then my extended family was all still Catholic and things like that. And for a little bit, there was like all this weird tension between me, my family, who was not going to church, my family, and the rest of their family, who was like Roman Catholic, to kind of moving away from that to being kind of out there, just not doing anything anymore, right? And so, like, I can just remember growing up, that was kind of where it all, kind of how it all happened for me. It was just, I felt like it was all over the place, and I was really, if I can just be fully transparent here, David, I was going to youth group because there was girls there, right? So like, as you, I mean, anyone listening is probably like, I know why this 14, 15, 16-year-old kid was going, right? And if I can be real, I really didn't have any sense of a relationship with God, which ultimately is what I believe it's all about. And I didn't really have any of that. So as soon as the youth group stuff was over, just my kind of aged out, right? I didn't pursue anything beyond that for a while, at least. I just decided to kind of go all in on work, and I'd spend my nights doing that and school and stuff like that instead. And that was kind of like, if you will, the early years of kind of my I guess religion, if you will.
Did you meet any hot chicks at youth group or no?
Of course, I don't think any of them ever liked me, but that's a different story. So
But you did end up getting married. You'll get to that part of the story, but I'm
yeah,
always
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
always interested. How did that happen, and what is she like, and all those sorts of things. I think I invited her on, but I'm not sure if she's too
Yeah,
shy.
dude. No, you did. She is not. I don't know why. I've gotten her on 2 podcasts with me ever, and both times she said, "Don't ever ask me to do that again." And the second time, she was
Oh,
really like, "I just don't want to." She's like, "I like her
oh,
behind the scenes." She
okay.
is actively working on podcasting right now as we speak, but she doesn't want to be on the microphone.
So, were you ever in Italy? Did you go see your aunts and uncles and stuff like that? Do you have a big family? Is it like a lot of cousins?
Yeah, it's a big family, and almost everybody's here, interestingly enough.
Oh, in Florida or in the States?
In the States. So, I've been to Italy, but never to, like, where the town where my family's from or anything like that, Palermo, and I've never actually been there. At some point, I'm gonna make it there, but I've been to other parts of Italy. Never met any family over there. Everyone that, again, that I've ever met has been here. New York is the biggest, is, like, our biggest like, hub, if you will, and then Miami, and then Jacksonville. Those are, like, our 3 places.
Ah.
And, we make mafia jokes because my family's like, "No one in our family's ever been in the mafia." I'm like, "Then why'd we move everywhere where the mafia families move?" Right? Like, why do we only move there?
Do you like the mafia genre in film? Do you enjoy that?
I mean, The Godfather 1 and 2, I really, really enjoyed that. That's some of my favorite. Beyond that, I haven't seen too much of it, though. I don't watch a whole bunch of movies or anything like that, but I felt like
Yeah.
that was, like, I don't know why. I still think of those movies. It's been years since I've seen them, but I love those 2 movies.
So you didn't mention siblings, but I always ask, do you have how many siblings do you have?
Yeah, I've got 3 younger brothers.
Oh, okay. And without betraying any confidences, what kind of faith or philosophy do you think they might have today?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, we're all very close in age. 7 years is the distance between me and the youngest. So, like, it's kinda back to back to back, right? And, so all of us kind of grew up very similar. The last one, not so much, but, like, the rest of us all pretty much the same. And so we have that same baseline understanding of, like, church, Sunday school, right? Like, all that stuff. And because of that, I feel it's been a disservice, and they would probably laugh if they'll probably hear this at some point, and they'll just laugh when I say this. But they know. Here's the example: they know the Bible better than anyone I know, but they also know how to use it against you in maybe the wrong ways, as well, to to, I guess, make a argument for their lack of involvement or following it. And so they might be better to have on here than I am personally, David. I'll let you know that. But yeah, so we all kind of grew up the same, but I would say that none of them really walk in any form of faith or anything like that at all.
Okay. So in your journey, because it's a corny word to use, but we're all on a journey. Can you think about sort of like moments of conversion where you maybe had, it doesn't have to be like a grandiose mystical event, maybe a dream. Like I've had several dreams in my life that were religious in nature and they have a special quality to them. But it doesn't even have to be that. It could just be a moment, maybe a loved one that passed and you reflect on the meaning of life and death and judgment and heaven and hell. Whatever it is, it might just be the beauty of a flower. Or one of my guests, he's Protestant, and for him, it's all about the tacos, like the delicious tacos. That makes him think about God. So, were there any highlights between youth and today where you think you can still think back on them fondly as points where you connect to God? And like I said, it doesn't have to be wild or mystical, but what are some of the ideas that come to mind as I'm speaking here?
Yeah, I've got a story to share about that actually. But real quick, I do wish it were tacos. That is just, I don't think I like tacos that much, apparently.
Might be
And
it
God
might be
forgive me if I
spaghetti for
should.
you. For you, it's probably
You know
spaghetti
what?
or something.
My mom's spaghetti. You might be right there, David. That's funny. Yeah, so to go to this story, so, like, late teens, getting out of youth group, and that was really my only connection to any form of, I guess, God, right? Or faith, religion, any of that. After I got out of that, I really decided to dive in on my career. I was like, man, I want to, like, I was very ambitious, let's put it that way. And I still am to some extent, but maybe just not in the same way that I once was. But at that point in my life, I was just like, man, I'm going to get ahead, right? Like, that's what I want to do. And again, I watched my family step away from their faith and stuff like that. And the same thing, they just went like all in on work and stuff like that, right? And so for me, I was like, all right, I'm going to do this. And my age just happens to, like, coincide with the 2006, 7, 8, 9 recession. And I was investing in real estate and started like a real estate company. And So to keep that part of it short, I went from doing really well in 2005 and 6 especially, to kind of fulfilling that mission I had for myself, right? Like, not focused on my faith at all, not focused on God, anything. I was focused on money and getting ahead. And I went from doing really well, a great trajectory, to doing really bad for my age. I mean, like, really bad, right? I can remember one time I was sitting in a dentist's office, and back then we didn't really have cell phones the way we do now. So I was holding a magazine. It was Forbes 30 under 30, and I was like, I'm going to be one of those guys. Like, I was maybe 17 or 18 when I was saying that, but I'm like, I'm going to be one of these guys that makes it to that level. And that dream was shattered in an instant once the economy wrecked, right? I was like upside down on mortgage, a company I had shut down, like all those things. And so again, I went from doing very well to the most in debt 18, 19-year-old you could ever meet. And that really was that I consider that, David, if I can say it this way, that's probably my rock bottom I've ever had in my life. I can't think of another time that was anywhere even near that. Like that was the time for me. And I can remember just kind of, I don't know, I guess having I was probably just feeling hurt because my ego got shot, right? Like everything was just like I just felt terrible. And I remember that time that as soon as like the money disappeared, I had some like fancy girlfriend who decided to disappear as soon as the money was gone. I also had quote unquote friends that also realized, oh, hard times, I'm kind of out for that, right? Like I don't want to have any of those discussions. Like it was fun when we were just going out and hanging out, right? And so all like I realized I was at my lowest point and I was alone. And man, that was again, just a bad season in my life. I was like, everything I've thought I wanted, everything that I am, like, it's just gone, right? And I'll never forget it. While I was kinda in that season, I went to the mailbox, or just getting the mail, assuming it was me full of bills that I that I owed, right? And one of the things happened to be like a postcard type flyer thing for a, young adults ministry that was very close to where I live. I looked at the address. I'm like, "Man, this is like I could probably walk. This must be across the street from my neighborhood. Like there's a business park over there. Must be back there, right?" And it's weird. I sat that on my counter for like 3 weeks, David, before I finally was like, "I'm gonna go." But here's the thing: that was kind of that moment for me because I knew that I was supposed to go, but I couldn't tell you why. Like I didn't have like any reason to go, right? Like that wasn't part of my life. It wasn't like, oh, my parents told me I gotta get back into church, right? Or like I got to do something here. It was nothing like that. I just kept on looking at like I need to go. And what kept me from doing it was the fear that I was going to be judged when I walked in. That someone was going to say, "Oh, look at this guy. He's that failure that is super in debt and doesn't have much to show for in his life." Because again, that's what built my entire reputation on, if you will, right? Like I built my whole foundation on the sand, if you will, right? Which was my own personal gain, my own financial stability, my own company, and all that was gone. And so, what really held me back was my fear of what people would think. And if you want, I'll keep on going on this story. I
Of
don't know if you want
course.
to interject.
No,
Okay,
no,
I
no,
want to
no.
make sure I'm not oversharing here. Um, I finally decided to go, and it was one of those moments where I was still just as fearful. Like, but I just walked in the door, and people were extremely nice. It was a really small gathering. There's probably 30 people there or something like that, and everyone was between the ages of I don't know, 20 and 30 probably, something like that. And I walked in, and they were all very nice. And in my head, I was just like, well, as soon as they figure out who you are, they're not going to be so nice to you, right? And like, also, what the heck are you doing in a church? Was the other thing I'm thinking. Like, why am I even here, right? And I would consider this to be like a non-denominational church. It was really just people who love Jesus gathering together. And as I had the opportunity to share, because we did like circle things, right? Like we're all just chatting in circles, but I now know it's called like a small group. And back then it was just kind of like, all right, we're going to share our feelings, apparently, right? And the more I shared, the more people appreciated me, not the opposite. Even though I really believed it was going to be the opposite. And I can remember leaving and feeling like what I was missing wasn't the people, it was the spirit within those people. It was actually God that was looking for me, searching for me, right? Like found me, right? But like trying to just figure out how to get back in, if you will, right? And God obviously knows how to get back in. And this was kind of that moment where it was just I just needed to make a change in my life. And that next week I went back, and one of the people that was a little bit older, he was like one of the leaders of it. I just asked him to pray for me, and he prayed for me. And if there was like a divine moment, that was it. I didn't feel any different, but the next day, for whatever reason, I woke up and things were just different for me. My life was changed. And I didn't feel the guilt, the shame, or anything like that anymore. But I also wasn't after the money the way I was. I was after really figuring out who this Jesus person was. And for the first time, really opening up the Bible myself to start to learn, okay, Jesus, I know we talked about him in Sunday school, but I don't know anything about the guy, right? Like, let me figure out who this is. And so that's kind of the story of me going from rock bottom to really finding who I was supposed to be in the first place.
Yeah, well, that's where you find the rock, is at rock bottom, right? So that's
Yeah,
that's
well
why
said. I never
that's
thought of
why.
it like that. That's good.
And they also say, that God allows our hearts to be broken so that He can squeeze in between the cracks, and because our hearts are like rock, right? And He wants to come in and make it a heart of flesh. So, just just briefly, what this is sort of a tangent, but it came to mind. You've got a successful project here with Podmatch, and I don't know how many other projects you have. You'll tell me later, but maybe you're just focused on the podcasting thing. But do you have to keep it hush hush? Do you put your lamp under a basket, or do you wait till the subject is broached? Like I was shy to ask you on because I thought, this businessman, why would he want to come and talk about faith and philosophy, right? And then I heard through the grapevine that you might be Christian, and you are. But there's a sort of taboo against talking about politics, religion, and whatever with people you don't know. It's not polite. So I'm just wondering, how do you walk that line? Because you want to share your faith, or let people know that you have the faith without being pushy, obviously. So how do you walk that fine line in your business? Because you're dealing with people that like to communicate, share ideas. Here's my journey. There's your journey. So how open are you?
Yeah, first off, to kind of set the foundation here, so Podmatch is that's my thing. It's what I do full
Oh, okay.
time. And for,
Okay.
for anyone listening who's like, what the heck is Podmatch? It's a service that connects podcast guests and hosts together for interviews. It's how we got connected today. And David, full transparency, I was really like reluctant to coming on the show because I listened to some of your episodes and like, man, I can learn a lot. I did learn, have learned a lot from you and will continue to, but I'm like, man, I don't know if I'm that well versed, like what am I going to add on this show? And this is really, I think one other time years ago, I went on a show that brought up faith, religion, any of this type of stuff, right? Like, and it was years ago at this point. I typically end up on shows that are, how do I grow my business through podcasting? How do I start a podcast? How do I grow my business? Right? How do I do software? Like those are typically where I end up. And to your point, like where is the line of when I can share and when I can't? And I can't say that I know the answer completely as to like when it's okay and how to put that in there. But I don't want to be the guy that keeps, like you said, I don't want my lamp under a blanket, right? Like I want it to be out. I want it to shine. And I'm continuously learning how to do that well. I'm not sure I've like cracked the code on it, but like I continuously learn because in the day, I believe that God gave me the platform that I have. He gave me the voice that I have, much like he gave you the voice that you have. And if that's the case, we should honor him with it. And that looks different for each of us, but I want to make sure I somehow, some way mention Jesus in anything I do, even if it's a little bit indirect. And so for me, I first and foremost try to make it known in our actions, in the way that the company exists, the way we operate, the way we serve and love people. Like that to me is first and foremost because I can sit here throwing blue in the face and be like, hey, Jesus loves you, and so do we, right? And I'm like, now give me your money or something, like, or I'm stealing people's credit card information, right? Like we have no access to that, by the way. Thanks, Stripe, for keeping us safe. But my point is like it's first and foremost has to be my actions. And then beyond that, I do like to vocalize it, but I've never been that great at it. Like, yeah, now at this point, like that story I shared was 15 years ago. And so like I've really grown in my faith a lot, but the more I've grown into it, the more I realize more than I even identify as a Christian as I identify as someone who follows Jesus. Jesus is my mentor. I read his book, right? Like I'm trying to become more like him. And that's like first and foremost. And I find that when I lead with that, people seem to be a little bit more receptive because they don't get this preconceived notion that, oh, he's just going to share just like this person does. And I know I rambled there a little bit, David. I don't know if that's
No.
helpful to answer your
Yeah, yeah,
question or
yeah, yeah.
not.
Of course, of course. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's really interesting because you are, if I can just judge you superficially, you're very nice and you're affable and friendly and kind and sensitive. I can tell you're quote unquote a nice guy. So yeah, I can see how you your heart comes through, and then people, if they discover that you're Christian, they're just going to say, well, yeah, that makes sense, right? So I think that's kind of how God's using you. And worldly success, God wants us to be responsible and to be in the world and taking care of our duties. So that's part of the Christian walk. It's not a part of the Christian walk that I'm good at, because I'm very lazy and very I've got a bad relationship with money and responsibility and all these sorts of things. So like, don't look to me as an example, but you can look to my friend Alex here. How to be in the world but not of the world, and how to serve, to be of service. If we look at the New Testament and how the apostles lived in the world, you know, Saint Paul said, if you don't work, you shouldn't eat. It's like we have to work, we have to be producing and taking care of each other, and that's part of the beauty of being successful, financially. although it sounds like such a hollow pursuit, financial success. But the beauty of it is that you can give, you can give back. And with the work that you're doing, Alex, it's not just giving financially to people, although there might be an aspect of that where people get success because of the ideas that are floating around in the podcast community. But it's about sharing, and it's about putting your heart out there and connecting and communicating. And I've met so many people that are really into either a religion per se, or a lifestyle and philosophical approach, how to be fulfilled and how to help other people be fulfilled. I'm actually surprised that you haven't had more religious interaction with the people on Podmatch, because I've met so many. I've met so many. But how many would you say you've been on? Have you been on like 5 over the years, or 10 or 20?
Shows in total?
Well, people that you met because they're on Podmatch.
Oh, man, I don't know. Like, I actually exclusively use Podmatch these days. So,
Okay.
it's I mean, sure, like, you have to take that with a grain of salt, but I just find it so much easier, like, and that's kinda what we designed it for, so, like, I use it exclusively at this point.
Cool.
So I can't even tell you, but here's an interesting one. Last weekend, I got invited to a wedding that was here in our town, so it was, Alicia and we got invited to this wedding, but I met the guy whose wedding it was through a Podmatch member who lives in Kentucky.
Ah.
And he ended up flying to the wedding as well. So, like, it was the 4 of us getting to hang out with the couple that got married, and obviously they had a bunch of people there. But it was like, wow, like, we met through this software and introduced us to someone in our own city, and we're at their wedding 6 months later, right? Like, kinda wild how stuff like that happens. But, yeah, at this point, probably hundreds of people I think I've connected with through the platform, and I love it. My favorite thing to do, even if it's not an interview, is just to connect with somebody else who's like-minded, right? Like, and we have the commonality of podcasting as a guest or host. It's just thrilling. I think it's fun.
So how many podcasts do you produce yourself? Just one, or more than one,
Yeah,
or?
just the one. Yeah, you know
Okay.
what's funny? Like, maybe you think this a little bit, David, but like a lot of people think I do a lot of stuff. I don't really. I've got Podmatch and I have my podcast, which is part of it. And it's called Podcasting Made Simple. So it's a podcast about podcasting. So like, like I'm through and through. That's like base. That's really all I'm doing, if you will, from a professional standpoint.
What's your earliest memory? I usually ask people earliest memory about God and religion. Well, what's your earliest memory of this thing called podcasting, where you realize, what's that? What's a podcast?
I was actually working a corporate job, so I did right after things got like real rough for me, right? Like I got into a corporate job, and 'cause it was safe, and that again, that's kind of like when I found God and stuff like that. But while I was there, very early on, I worked my way up to management, and I was going in to visit one of my departments, so it was the receiving department. And I walk back there, I can hear like I walk through the door, and it's a long walk, but I can hear them. I can hear something on, right? I can hear them listening to something. I walk back there, look at the computer screen. I was like, what are y'all doing? I was like, are you just listening to this? And they're like, yeah, we're listening to a podcast. I was like, what the heck is a podcast? This was like, I'll be real, Dave. This was too late for me not to know what it was. Like, it was the 2010s. Like, it wasn't 2004 or whatever when it came out. And so I'm like, a podcast. I'm like, yeah, it's on your phone. I'm like, no, it's not. And like, yeah, it's the purple icon. I'm like, oh shoot, it's on my iPhone. Look at that. And I was like, so can I find this? And they're like, oh yeah, if you like it. And I don't even remember what show it was or anything about it. I just remember being back there for like 10 minutes. I'm like, you are really listening to this interview happen, right? That was my first memory or encounter with a podcast. And that day, I was going to be, I don't remember why, but I wasn't in the office all day. So I put in some earbuds and turned on a podcast. And I never looked back after that. I was like, well, I love this. I'll be doing this every day forever. So that was my earliest podcasting memory.
Pretty cool. How would you define because you're kind of like an expert, right? How would you define the podcast over against every other type of, TV and radio and everything else?
So podcasting to me is the only one from the audio first standpoint. Like that's podcasting is audio first, right? It's the only one that can engage on a really deep level. And I'll use the example of myself. Early on, when I was like early stage learning, my mom realized I had trouble focusing. But not if she gave me Legos to play with. If she gave me Legos to play with and she was having a conversation with me, I would remember the whole conversation. And that's kind of always been just part of who I am. Like if I'm still today, if I'm like playing pool or ping pong or out kicking the soccer ball around, I'll have a better conversation just because I'm engaged. And I find that podcasting allows you to do that sort of thing. You can cook, you can clean, you can work out, you can be on a walk while you're listening to a podcast. So not everyone is like me, but for anyone who is, man, my retention of podcasts, like you can quiz me after most of them and I can do pretty well on it. Let's put it that way. And so for me, it just engages on that different level. but also because of the nature of its content, people really become loyal to it because every time they're cooking, cleaning, working out, it's what they're going to start listening to is a podcast. And people are able to like really engage and connect with someone like you, David, like a great podcast host, right? They're able to connect with you knowing that every week or whatever it is, you're going to show up and really add value with you, a conversation you have with a guest. And I also like this is the last thing I'll say. I like to think of it this way, but podcast listeners are like people sitting in seats. So it's not the same as like social media engagements where someone might be laying down, just scrolling really fast through stuff, right? Someone's probably listening for 30, 45 minutes. And I always say, if there's 30 people sitting in seats and you're on a stage, would you show up every week for them? And the answer is always absolutely. I would definitely be there, right? Like I'm going to be there every single week for those 30 people. We need to be viewing our listeners the same way because it really has that same sort of authority.
Yeah, it's amazing. My sister got into podcasting many years ago. I don't know how many years ago, 20 years ago or whatever, early. And she's like, "Oh, you should start a podcast." And, I just converted in 2009. I just converted from atheistic Satanism to Catholicism. And some people joke that's not much of a leap, but anyway. Um,
I beg to differ. It's a little different. So-
Thank you, thank you. Nice of you to say so. But my sister and her husband, they're like, "You should do a podcast." And I'm like, "About what?" And they said, "Well, you're into religion. Why don't you do one about religion?" So I did, but I didn't start it till 2016. But the thing about podcasting as a host is you get to know people. Like there's some people in my live chat now, Matt and Daniel Drazinovich, and my friend. I've even got a friend from Turkey. Um, but you get to know these people, because you interact with them. And some of my guests I've had on like 15, 20 times because they are friends. And my wife thinks I'm a little bit strange because they're not real life friends. But like you said, you had that wedding experience and you met a guy that flew in. How many people do you think you've met in real life that you've interacted with through your podcast stuff?
yeah. I mean, well, if we excluding conferences, I'm assuming, right? Or do you want to include that? Because that'd be a lie.
Well, like where you're, as long as you're like in physical presence, like,
Oh,
yeah.
then yeah, hundreds for sure because
Okay.
of the podcasting conferences. Because like
Oh,
Podfest, I'll be going to Podfest. I go every year, and so I'll be going
okay.
in a couple months here, and I mean, there'll be hundreds of people there that I know that use Podmatch will be there.
And you have a chance to chat with them, like,
Oh
"Hey,
yeah, for
you're the
sure.
guy that does this podcast," and you
I
chat
try
a
to
little
be
bit.
Yes, I try to be that's one of my things is I try to be very accessible, which is really the opposite of a lot of people in software, is they like to kind of put up a wall between them and people, right, that are using their software. Maybe it's because they don't wanna hear anything bad about it, I don't know. But for me, I just made a point from day one, like, if you message me on social media or email me, it's gonna be me emailing you back. If I'm really slammed, my wife is gonna jump in and help me. If I go to the conferences, I don't fill my time with speaking. I'll speak once, I like to speak once every time, but the rest of it, I literally just tell people, "Hey, I'm going to be posting up here. Come sit down. Let's have a conversation. Let's hang out." Because I'd like to meet and take pictures with as many people as possible. And so for me, any chance I get, or if like a Podmatch member happens to be driving through Jacksonville, Florida, I typically will try to grab lunch or coffee at least together.
Cool.
It's just listen. If people are trusting me with their time and using this and helping us make the community better, I want to be involved in that process.
Very cool. Yeah, I really appreciate that about you. I was surprised when you responded. I forget how I reached out to you, maybe email or maybe on Podmatch itself. But I was surprised. You and Alicia were very communicative, and I thought, "What? Aren't they too busy to talk to little old me?" Like. But my friend Daniel Drazinovich is asking what you think about Twitter Spaces, because I've never been on a Twitter Space. I tried to go on once, but because I'm on a PC, there was some problem. They couldn't hear me. And what do you think about Twitter Spaces?
It reminds me of. Do you remember Clubhouse? Does that ring a bell? Like, so Clubhouse was basically kind of the idea of Twitter Spaces, and Facebook had one for a little bit. Like, it all came from this thing Clubhouse, which is basically like an audio chat room, and people started doing like their quote unquote podcast through it. There's a few issues with it. I think it can be fun, but I think it's best for not podcasting, but it's best for something like brainstorming. Like if you're trying to go in there and figure out something together, or you have like quick questions you can jump in and out of, I think it's valuable for that. But to actually be a replacement for podcasting, I don't think it's a long-term solution. Let's put it that way, because the quality of the content tends to be a lot lower, not just from sound quality, because it is like you're streaming over something like X or Twitter, right? Like, so you're relying on them instead of your own tech. But also just because there's so many random things that get asked, and some people, if they jump in late, they might be like, "Hey, what microphone you're using?" Like we covered that 10 minutes ago. Right now, that's a podcast. For a listener experience later, it's like, okay, that's super frustrating. They talked about the same microphone 3 separate times in a 30-minute segment, right? But again, brainstorming, quick conversation, getting a group of friends together, like a mastermind type of thing. I think it's really cool for that.
Yeah, this brings to mind a dark subject. I'm wondering if you have opinions about it. You probably do. But, the internet isn't that old, and there's always been concern about government control, censorship, and these sorts of things. And we've already sort of hinted at the fact that there's siloing taking place where people only reinforce their beliefs by getting rid of anyone that has a different point of view. I'm very surprised on Twitter. Like I lose a lot of followers when one of my interviews, it's not a guest that they agree with, and I just think that's really strange. So there's this automatic siloing thing where people only want to hear what they already believe. So that's another element of the danger of this technology that's the internet. But I'm just wondering if you can comment generally, especially with an emphasis on control, government control, and censorship. There may be a good side to that, a justified part of that, but there's also a dark side to that. So just talk about that from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it started off with good intentions. And I always say it's the few ruin things for the many, right? Like on Podmatch, there's certain things that the software does I wish it didn't, but if we don't, there's 5 people out of the 13,000 people on it that will drastically abuse it, and we've seen that stuff happen, right? And so from the government standpoint, maybe it's a necessity. I'm not trying to make a case for it though, because I really don't like censorship at past a certain point, right? A little bit's probably okay. Like certain things just should not be public, right? Like that are just inhumane and just terrible, right? Like that those things should have somewhere else to go, I suppose. But in general, yeah, I don't know. I see more and more of it, and I think it actually really started with social media. Like, sure, the internet's not that old in general, but social media really like set the pace for that. I'll never forget it. David, at one point, I started like just sharing my journey on a blog and through Facebook specifically about like just my journey of faith. Like, I'm like getting through some of the troubles I was in. I wasn't like a great writer, but I was just writing little things here and there, and it started growing. Like, it got really big. I'll never forget it. I joined like a network, if you will, of different Christian writers and bloggers and stuff like that, and one day, my engagement dropped by 99% across the board. And I went there because I want to be like, I probably did something wrong, right? I went on there and before I could even post anything, everyone had the same experience. Everyone's like, I just lost 99%, like 85%, like all this stuff. And sure enough, that was the beginning of censorship because you remember Facebook is built by an interesting group of people who really don't like, I don't think they like any sort of faith, religion, anything like that, right? And so for them, they're just like, hey, stop showing people this. We own it. We can do whatever we want. Just stop. Like, no one needs to see that anymore. Instead, promote this, right? And so I think that really, to me, kicked that off. And I don't agree with that. I think at some point, any of us that believe in Jesus, that are like for you, like Catholicism, like at some point, that stuff just gets nah, no more of that on the internet, right? And that'd be very not easy at this point, but not so unrealistic, right? No one listening is like, oh, that can't be possible. Like you're like, oh no, I could see that happening. It's probably not hard to do at this point, right? I do think it's something we should be very careful of, and I'm a huge free speech advocate, and it's why I love podcasting. It's built on a different technology that is much better for distribution. It's very hard to cancel or censor, uh, but in the internet in general, I'm pretty concerned about it, and I'm really against it. Like I do think that free speech needs to be protected.
Another issue, another aspect of you know putting your stuff out there into the world, is you know you've got YouTubers that are huge. You mentioned Joe Rogan. He was already big because he's involved in many things before getting into podcasting. But there's this idea of like famous people, internet famous people, and whatever. And I've interviewed a few. So I want you to talk about, from a Christian perspective and from a human perspective, like when you're well known, what does that do, and what does money do to you, and these sorts of things. But more the fame, like and a lot of podcasts are just regular people like me that have jobs and stuff. Um, what would you say is when do you cross the line? And when you cross the line into being very well known and getting a lot of clicks, what are the dangers with that? And are you prepared, you know, and are some of the people that you've met in the podcasting world that are getting big, are they prepared for the spiritual journey? Because Satan is real and he knows how to tempt us, right? So just talk about fame and internet fame and what are the dangers and how do you prepare for that?
I don't think that anyone was ever made to be famous. If I can just start with that, if that could be our foundation for this, and like I'll use Jesus as the example. When Jesus had big crowds, he tend to disappear, right? Like which to like modern, like think about that now. Like imagine that you and I host a gathering and 5,000 people show up and you're like, all right, man, I'm gonna go get some time alone. I'm gonna be like, what the heck are you talking about? There's 5,000 people here. Like figure this out until they all leave, right? Like, but there's something to be said for the fact that I don't know if we're supposed to feel that way. And listen, I have some celebrity, if you will, in podcasting, which is a very small niche. So I say that humbly. But I'll never forget this. One time I walked into a party. It was after one of the conferences. There was, I think, 800 people at this party, all podcasters. And I walked in, and I mean, literally the entire bar turned, clapped, and cheers. Everyone handed me drinks. Like the whole, I couldn't walk anywhere without people patting me on the back and like taking pictures real quick. And like that to me was probably the highest point I've ever had as far as like quote unquote feeling like a celebrity. I Part of me liked it. The other part of me said this is wrong. Like I shouldn't be held in that regard. I just happen to be another podcaster at this place. And yes, I just serve this group of people. And so I always have to continuously remind myself that I serve first, right? I'm not here to be served. I'm here to serve. And again, that might sound like some familiar words there that many people might know from the Bible, right? From Jesus. Like he showed up to serve, not to be served. And for me, I have to remind myself of that. And so I think anyone who's starting to grow online, you're going to find this same thing to be true. People are going to recognize you in person. People are going to be like, oh, guess how many followers David has, right? Like, even if it's not you bring it up, you're like, yeah, right? Like, it gets hard not to let some pride build in. But listen, pride to me is always the beginning of destruction. And I have watched it happen too many times at this point in software, not just podcasting, but the software companies, other founders I've met. They start to get all this clout, it starts to grow, and then they have a really hard crash. Whether that be in their personal lives, it falls apart, or professionally, they just ruin their reputation because you can just feel the pride and the ego that gets involved in it. And so for all of us, sure, grow something big that impacts a lot of people, but don't forget that you're just playing a role in that. It's not because of you. I always say it's Christ through you. Right. So for me, it's Jesus is the reason that what I'm doing is working. And I firmly believe that. To someone who doesn't have any faith, I'd be like, that's ridiculous. No, that really is it. If I have a blueprint for how I've built the software, I followed it from the Bible. And that is firmly what I believe. So I am just the hands and feet being used for this. I'm going to be the first person to show up and serve. And I always want to remember that. So it's constantly going back and reminding myself of that. And then lifting other people up, not yourself, is a great, like, very practical way to do this. As when someone like, wow, Alex, you're amazing. Be like, oh, I love your podcast. David, it's great to be like, you know what? I've got some great tools in the background. I've got some great support in the background. There's so many great people that are involved in this process with me. Being able to do that can kind of turn that around. I find the creators that long term do the best, they tend to be the most humble. It's not always the case, but typically they're the ones that you can tell they actually really deeply care about the people they're serving, about what they're doing. You can tell they're just passionate about it. They're not there to try to make a bigger name for themselves. They're there to continuously add value. And that's kind of where I see, if you will, this type of thing going on the internet. So you have to be very, very careful with it.
Cool, great answer. Another thing that God has gifted us men with is women. And if you're married, you already know. How long have you been married?
I've been married since 2012.
Okay,
Everyone can do the
11
math.
years,
20. Yeah, there we
12
go. Yeah,
years.
that's quick math. Good
Um,
job.
Arithmetic's not my forte. But we married men, we know how humbling it is to be married because the woman that you love, she's going to tell you and she knows you and she's going to be able to see through any BS that you want to put up. It's amazing. I don't know what your relationship's like, but that's my experience. My wife would just cut to the quick, like with an observation, and it's just like, you got me and you humbled me. And this is about, it could be about the way I rolled the toothpaste, or it could be about anything. It's just like she will nail me. And so I want to know on your spiritual journey, if you thank God for your wife, and what kind of challenges um, God is presenting you with in terms of you know dealing with this other human being who more often than not is right. You might not want to admit it, but she's right more often than not. When it comes to critiquing you or giving you advice, that's very humbling. So just talk a little bit about the spiritual aspect of marriage.
Yeah, so for me, first and foremost, absolutely love Alicia, my wife. She's incredible, and to this day, I thank God for her, and I always will. And one of the big things I've done my best to do is just to really honor my wife. I think one of the best ways that we as men can do that is to actually take seriously the words they say. Even if it feels repetitive, it probably means you're not hearing it. And I've just learned to really accept the fact that that might be the case. If she's repeating something, it's probably because I'm not actually understanding. And so I don't necessarily follow her around with a notepad, but if she comes to me with something, I take it very, very seriously. And I'll typically write it down if it's that serious, or I just make sure that, okay, this is like going to happen from now on. It ends up on a whiteboard or something like that. So I'm like, okay, this is something she noticed. She really helps me in the level in the area of humility. She helps me in personal development, spiritual development, like all that stuff. Like very much so helps and even leads me in some of those ways. Like just really like she's the first person that sees or hears what I say. I could walk out of this room right when I'm done with this because she's one room over, and she could be like, "Hey, you said this, this, and this," and I might send David an apology email if there was something I said that was just like way out of line. Right? I don't think I've done that today.
No.
But thanks, David. I appreciate it. But I'm just saying, like the point is, like I've learned to just say I'm going to honor my wife through making sure that I respect what she says, and typically she's almost always right, and it always seems to help me. It helps me level up and get better. So I consider that to be a blessing from God, right? Uh, and so that's kind of the way I've been able to do that. At the same time, like we work together full time, so we've had to be very strategic with how we do that because most couples don't work well together. I mean, we work together a room aside from each other in our home. Like that's we like working from home. So we just decide we're not going to get an office. We're just going to work here. But we've had to build very good boundaries from when we can talk about work, when it's personal, what are the things that overlap? Because sometimes they do overlap, right? You wouldn't want your employee to come in and critique the way you just shared on a podcast, but your wife can, right? So you kind of have to figure those things out. And the thing I'll share with that is we both separately have really strong relationships with God, but we also together do as well. We make sure that we spend time together. We're talking about what we're learning. We pray together. We make sure that we're worshiping together. All that stuff is extremely important. And we have great people in our lives, is the other thing. We make sure that it's not just the two of us always. We work together, right? So we make sure that when we're out doing stuff, we're with other people as well that are also encouraging us in the proper direction. But yeah, for me, it all comes down to really communicating well, right? Listening to my wife, and then just constantly pursuing her outside of work. Like I got to make sure I do that as well. And that's like we're going out with friends. We're also going on dates and stuff like that. Like I make sure I really do that stuff well, and then just thank God for her all the time. So that's kind
That's
of our
cool.
relationship.
That's cool. I'm interested in the differences between men and women. You're not an expert on it, but you are a man and you are married to a woman. So I just ask you, um, is it true? I think it is, but have you seen any evidence for the fact that women are more intuitive and more emotional, meaning, they can cry more easily, they have more depth of empathy and these sorts of things. Is that true from your experience? Like you can think about your sister, your mother. Oh, you don't have a sister, but your mother, your wife, other women in your life. Do you think that they have more intuition and they're more connected, the head with the heart?
Oh, for sure. And maybe some of that bleeds into the emotional side as well. But like, if Alicia ever tells me she like has like a bad feeling about something, like it's a hard no for me. Like if she's like, I'm not sure, something feels weird about that. I'm like, cool, I'm out. Like that's a great indication there's something wrong there that I'm just not able to see. But David, what, has that been? Is that the same experience for you? If you don't mind me turn that
Yeah,
over to
yeah,
you,
of
like,
course, of course. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I envy women in a lot of ways because of that lightning fast intuition, which is according to Plato. I don't know if you read philosophy or not, but according to Plato, that's the highest form of knowledge is intuition. Okay, because it's direct. And my religion teaches the same thing. Like in Christianity, we know that direct face-to-face communication with God is instant, and that's what heaven's going to be, that knowledge, that direct knowledge. um but and also, I'm envious of women because they're able to cry. I'm not, I was just listening to this folk singer guy, and he had a song talking about this man who couldn't cry. He was unable to cry. I can cry. I just shed a tear yesterday, but it's not really flowing the way I think it should be flowing, and at the appropriate times and these sorts of things. Um, but yeah, women, a lot of people, a lot of men are critical of women because they're hysterical, or they're just irrational, or a bit messy with the emotions. But I don't see it that way. I see the bright side of that. My mother is emotionally disturbed. She's got mental problems, like psychological problems, suicidally depressed and these sorts of things. So there's a dark side. There's a dark side for sure. But with women generally, women who are more healthy psychologically, there's a real beauty to that emotionality, right?
Yeah, you know, and a lot of the fact that guys don't like, sure, some of it's definitely like the way we're wired, the way we're made, but also I think that some of our previous generations really like prided themselves on not having emotions or like you got to be tough, like you can't cry, right? And my upbringing was like that. Like, love my dad. We have a great relationship now, but when I was growing up, he was like always away, always business. But like, I, it was just like, hey, like us men, we don't cry, right? And I feel like I kind of had that on me for a while,
Mm.
and that really like I probably didn't cry until I was in my 20s. Like, just didn't really happen. I mean, obviously, when I was a kid, every time I got spanked, I'm sure I hollered and cried and stuff like that, right? But beyond that, I didn't really. And in more recent years, I found myself like crying more, and it's not like frequent, but like when I feel that emotion happen, like I let it happen versus like fighting it, saying no, that's not what men do. Now I'm just like, no, if I'm feeling like something emotional is happening, I'm gonna move into it. And being able to watch my wife model that has been what's helped me a lot.
Yeah. Um, this is totally random that I'm going to ask you this, but just this is how my podcast is, like it or lump it. But a young Canadian transgender person reached out to me today, and I might have this person on my podcast. And I've had a few transgender, but when it comes to the whole men versus women dichotomy, I think there are real differences, and I think God created male and female, and never the twain shall meet. And there's a lot of, I talked about psychological problems. There are a lot of people that are suffering from psychological problems. I don't want to get you in hot water talking about controversial stuff, but what do you think about, like at the schools today here in Canada? I don't know about in the States, but they're teaching all kinds of crazy stuff about sex and what is a boy, what is a girl, and so maybe just comment really briefly on how you see that from a Christian perspective.
Yeah, this has always been a really confusing topic for me. I have friends that are transgender. I have friends that are gay. I have friends that are lesbian. Like I have all those people in my life, and not all of them, but most of them seem like, oh, they're pretty well put together, right? Like I don't feel like there's any like real problem there, as far as like from a psychological level. Now, sometimes I meet people, I'm like, hey, I don't even know if you really are like transgender is a great example. I think you're just really confused about everything right now. Like you're having like 30 different issues. You're on all kinds of medications. Like, I think you're just confused, right? And a lot of that can get to a spiritual level. I mean, no disrespect by
Of
saying
course,
that,
of course.
but I've seen two different extremes. Let's put it that way. And I've never really been able to like pinpoint exactly like how to approach this necessarily. For me, I know I love people, and like that's what God has told me to do, right? And I love people, and like that's just part of who I am. I'm there to serve people, but I do think at the same time with like this stuff, we do have to be careful when, especially teaching it to somebody who is not feeling like they don't know who they are, right? Like so, for me, growing up, I'm 100% boy, like always have been, even when I was a kid. If you had said, "Well, you might not be," that would have been very confusing for me, and I think that that's what causes some psychological issues, the ones that are on that other extreme, like I said, that like actually are on tons of medications, having all kinds of problems and stuff like that, right? I think that seed gets planted spiritually when you're a kid, when someone's like, you might not be what you think you are, right? If you already feel like you know what you are, go with that, right? Like lean into that. But if you start having like all these deep issues because people are throwing all these different things at you, I think that's when it gets really muddy. I think that's when you can run into some serious problems. And at the end of the day, all this stuff, like across the board, like any sort of psychological issue, I have to believe is rooted in something spiritual is just what I believe.
Yeah. You know, Pope Francis, I don't know what you think about him, but I like him. I happen to like him, even though a lot of my conservative Catholic friends think he's the Antichrist. But he's very seemingly very progressive and left leaning and all these sorts of things. But he puts the dignity of the person first, and I really like his pastoral care for all of humanity. And he's very gentle when it comes to persons who are LGBTQ, whatever, and I think that's good. But he's also firm about, like, if you want to be healthy and live according to your nature and the end that God designed you for, then you can't engage in all kinds of stuff that people are that the world is promoting. Um,
I look forward to your conversation, by the way. And you said you've had people that are transgender before. I'd love
yeah,
to. I don't know if you know off the top of your head, but regardless, when we're done here, I'd love to actually be able to
sure.
check one of those out. Because
Yeah, yeah, I'll
again,
send you some links.
going the beauty of podcasting is if let's just imagine the government decides no more transgender. we still have these podcast episodes where we can go actually hear what somebody says it's like versus just what's thrown in front of us. And that goes for Christianity, for any of those things, right? Like the fact is that free speech needs to be protected if we're ever going to fully understand each other and how we can actually serve and love one another, right? So I know that I didn't mean to go right back on my podcast soapbox, but I had to for a minute.
No, but that's that's one of the most defining aspects of my approach in the podcast is to give people a voice. I mean, I don't care what your point of view is. Let's just try to be honest and say, well, this is my perspective. And like I said before going live, like I don't agree with everyone, and I don't expect to agree with everyone, and I don't want to agree with everyone, because it's like we are all, as I keep saying, we're all on a journey, and it's very fascinating. And there's baggage, some of the stuff we don't even remember. Like you said, in early childhood development, there might have been someone that said something or did something or gave you a look or touched you, God forbid, or whatever. And you may not even consciously be aware of it, but, God's aware of it. And so this is why the church teaches us to be very, very delicate and gentle with people without smiling on sin. We can't smile on sin, okay? But we have to recognize the dignity in people, and we can't think ourselves superior to any human being. That's one of the
Right.
dangers, and I see this is one of the things I find about social media that's toxic, is the Christian on Christian hatred and the judgment and damning each other to hell and these sorts of things in the extreme case, but just hating each other. So yeah, the dignity of the person and loving each other, and not that humility, where you realize that there but for the grace of God go I. And even in the worst case scenario, a pedophile priest who raped, tortured, and murdered a baby or whatever it is, that's worst case scenario. That's pretty dark. But
Mhm.
you know, imagine loving that person. Because you can't go to heaven if you don't love that person, and you can't think yourself superior. You can feel superior, that's natural. And you don't have to like that criminal, but you have to love them. So at the heart of Christianity is love. And even Jesus, as he hung on the cross, he said, "Forgive them; they know not what they do." This is tough stuff. And if you want to talk about being manly and having courage and fortitude and character, Jesus on the cross forgiving those who tortured and killed him unjustly, that's quite a lesson. So maybe just talk about the love of Christ, and how incredibly difficult it is to exercise that love, even for Christians. Because as I said, on the internet, on social media, if you look at the behavior of Christians, it doesn't seem very Christ-like some of the times. This is not to look down my nose at them. I'm the same way. I'm quick to judge, but just talk about Christ and his love, and how difficult it is to really love people who often are despicable, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to use myself as an example here. I I like to finish things. I'm an achiever. I like doing the work. Let's put it that way. And like if I can go with a biblical example, like when it's uh, Mary at like the feet of Jesus and her sister being in the kitchen, the one keeping everything organized and stuff like that. I'm that person for sure. And
Martha.
I yeah, and I automatically um go to works. And listen, I mean, like our works aren't what save us. So just because I'm quote unquote better than somebody or someone's better than me doesn't mean that they're any more saved than I am, right? Now it might be that person is let's see, God is more proud of that person, maybe. Sure, like that's a different topic. But in general, it's one of those things where we have to realize that like it's not just what we do. And again, I'm using that as myself as an example there because I tend to go workspace. But if we go back to Jesus on the cross, let's use that example. There was the person who was justly hung next to him on a cross, right? Who said, "Don't forget me when you enter your kingdom," right? And Jesus didn't say, "Well, hold on, let's see all the good things you've done in your life, all the bad things." No, he realized that person believed, had faith in him, and said, "Yeah, you'll be with me in paradise today." Right? Like it was instant. And yet there's other people that seemingly have done a ton of right stuff, but the Bible tells us that God's going to say, "Away from me, like I never knew you." Right? And there are people that are doing things, quote unquote, for God. And so I think that all of us, myself including this, we have to remember that again, it's not our works, it's nothing that we've done. It's Jesus' sacrifice that has enabled us to have access to the Father. And like my whole life is about believing that very thing and diving into that because it's not my works, it's not what I do, right? I do want to work and do well for God. So I'm not saying, "Oh, I'm just gonna sit back and do nothing." But I know my primary objective is two things: love God and love people. So I'm doing my best to love God and love people. Like you said, even the worst people, we've got to find a way to love them. I've been going through the 10 commandments. This is the last thing I'll share on this. I'm on commandment number 6. Commandment number 6 is thou shalt not murder. And my whole life, people have always been like, well, at least I've got that one right. And when I dove into it, that's the first thing I said. I'm like, well, at least I got this one right. But I was like, let me see what Jesus says about this very commandment. And I dive through, and Jesus says, I tell you, it's not just murder. If you even think wrongfully of somebody in your head, then you've already committed murder. And I was like, I literally wrote down the words in my journal, David. I wrote down, this is impossible. And that's really how I felt that moment, because I'm like, how many times does someone cut me off in traffic and I'm like, immediately go toward this person's an idiot, right? Like, even if that's as simple as a thought is, there's not cuss words going through my head, I'm not flicking them off, right? Like, if that's all that's going through my head, I'm still basically saying God's creation is an idiot, right? Like something that is made in God's image. Like, think about what we're really saying. How do you respond in love all the time? And so for me, it goes back to what I'm saying here. It's not my works. It's got nothing to do with me. It is Jesus forgiving me, even though I've made all the mistakes I ever can and more, right? And just sitting in that and knowing that, you know what? I'm loved how I am. I'm going to love him. I'm going to love others as like my way of giving back to God.
Yeah, absolutely. As you were speaking, I was thinking about uh, Saint Paul, and how he talked about dying to self and living unto Christ. And so if you're annoyed with someone, which happens, most days, I would have to say for myself, like, I'm annoyed by people. I'm annoyed by people. I'm annoyed by myself also, but that's an internal thing that's just self-regulating. But people are annoying. People do annoy us in this sick fallen world because of original sin and actual sin. It's not because of God. It's not because what God created is defective. It's because our sin has put everything out of whack. The whole universe is groaning because of sin. But I think about St. Paul and how simple the solution is, because he says, I don't do what I want to do. I do what I don't want to do. And there's this law of the flesh, and the law of the spirit, in spirit, I know what I want. It's pure and good and holy. But my flesh is got this thorn in my side. But he prayed to God, and God said, my grace is sufficient for you. And St. Paul realized, I mean, he's such a hero to me and to all Christians, but he realized, it's no longer I live, Christ who lives in me. And that's the solution. So when you're in traffic and someone cuts you off and annoys you, it's that little choice that you make. Like, hey, now it's an opportunity. I can die to self. Because what am I bringing to the table in this moment? Hatred, pride, impatience. I'm bringing all this ugly stuff. That's not godlike. So I can see what I am, wretched, and I choose to let go of that and let go and let God. You know what I mean? Like, let God come in, and it's. I'm not saying it's easy. It's not easy to do, but that really is that's the project that we're engaged in as Christians, right?
That's great, man. I wrote down those words, let go and let God. That's super insightful. Love that. That's great.
Jesus, take the wheel. So yeah, it's amazing. It's been amazing meeting you. I thank you again for coming on, and I hope you come back again in the future. Maybe to wrap up, I'll give you a chance to just sort of give the final thought, a closing thought, and also while you're at it, if you want to sort of, I put the link, I think, to let me see what link I put in the show notes here. I put a link to podpros.com/win. I don't know what that is, but you can talk about that and other links, and where people can find you, and but also just give us a little spiritual message of hope for my listeners, because my listeners are very diverse. Some are Christians, some are not, some are atheists, some are
Yeah.
agnostic. So just a general nice message.
Yeah, and again, David, first and foremost, I want to mention I've really enjoyed your podcast. Not just listening to other like believers, but listening to people that are total opposite. Just you do such a good job fostering a healthy debate at times and conversation. So thank you first and foremost. So everyone who's listening to this, stick with David, stick with this podcast. This is the way to go. Um, the link there, podpros.com/win. If you're interested in podcasting at all on either side of the mic, whether you're experienced, new, go to that link and it'll give you some next steps. Very simple things. It'll give you 5 quick wins you can read off in less than 5 minutes. It doesn't want your email address or anything like that. Just if I can help. Again, either side of the mic, whether you're pre-starting, started, whatever it is. So podpros.com/win. The last thing I'll share, David, I originally wanted to share a scripture, but just given, I'm not going to go that route. What I'm going to say is this: seek to be a person of value instead of a person of profit. Seek to be a person of value, not a person of profit. So what I mean by that is whether you start a business, whether you have a podcast or some sort of platform, don't seek the numbers to continue to climb. Instead, say, how can I do something for each of these people? How can I serve them better? And so I always tell people just to it's funny I'm wearing a shirt that says it, but lead with value. Find a way to add value to people's lives. The more you can do that, I find the better off you are. But also, man, just think if everyone served that one person who needed the most today, the world would be a different place tomorrow. So let's get out there and do that together.
Lead with value. That would make a good t-shirt, actually.
Yeah, right. Not that I'm not wearing it right now.
So great to meet you. God bless you. I hope you're gonna pray for me and mine. I'm gonna pray for you and yours, and I enroll all my guests in a perpetual mass. You'll be getting the prayers of the
Oh, I
mass
love
every
that.
day. You and your
Love
loved
that.
ones. And in 2024, I hope you come back because I have a lot more questions. I want to talk about prayer. I want to talk about the Bible, New Testament, and all. There's so much to talk about. And as you know, even though you're not an expert on any particular aspect of Christianity, you are an expert on yourself, and that's what you bring to the table. And it was amazing, hearing your perspective on all the random questions that I asked you today. So I hope you come back in 2024 and have a great happy new year. How was your Christmas, by the way? Did you enjoy it?
It was great. Yeah, time with family was my first time being home in a long time, so it was
Ah,
cool just getting to stay here and not traveling around and stuff like that. So,
you didn't eat
yeah,
too much. You look very fit.
I try. This was the best I've done in any prior year, I will say that. This
Uh,
was the best. If I can make this my new baseline on the holidays, I'm doing really good. So,
Excellent. Great to meet you, my brother, and
yeah,
we'll
thanks,
talk
David.
soon, okay?
Take care. Thanks again. God
God
bless.
bless you. Bye bye.